So you want to know how to change one of these thermostatic radiator valves for a new one, and that's probably because you can no longer increase or decrease the temperature of your radiator, or maybe you just want to change a lock shield valve for one of these TRVs. And I'm going to show you, the DIYer, how you can do this job without draining the heating system. This applies to a gravity fed system but also a pressurized system, and doing this without draining the system means that we can not only do this a lot quicker, but we can do it without having to replace any of the inhibitor that's in the system like you would if you had to refill the whole system. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do this job step by step here on the DIY Guy. So I'll run through the tools that you're going to need first, and then we'll crack on with the job. But before we do that, if this video helps you out, hit the like button for me, because that really helps this video to reach and help more people just like you on YouTube. And if you like all kinds of DIY content, plumbing, electrics, construction, tool reviews, then hit the subscribe button down below, because I've got loads of stuff on the channel and plenty to come in 2022. So let me run through some of the tools that you might need for this job. First things first, make sure you've got plenty of towels and things like that, because unfortunately this job is not completely water free. You will always get a little bit of water, so make sure you protect any carpets and have something ready to catch a little bit of water. You're also going to need an adjustable spanner, a screwdriver or radiator key, whichever you have at hand. I can't find my radiator key, so we're using a screwdriver. Got some PTFE tape in there. Maybe not necessary, but always good to have some nearby in case you can't get the olive to reseal. And these are tank bungs or a rad valve change kit, whatever you want to call them. Let me explain a little bit more about what these are. Plumbers will have these in their bag already, but for you DIYers that have a gravity fed system, which means you'll have a tank in your loft, if you're not sure, go and have a look. But for you guys that are doing this on a gravity fed system, you're going to need a couple of these so that we can pull a vacuum and that we don't get wet in the process of changing the TRV. I'll stick a link to these bungs in the description so that you can go and grab yourself some. They're inexpensive and they make this job really easy. Now you won't need those bungs if you're doing this on a pressurized system, but we'll go through more of that in a second as we make a start. Now the last thing you're going to need, of course, is a TRV. This is a 15mm thermostatic radiator valve made by Drayton. They're the ones I usually use because they're really simple and really reliable and actually pretty inexpensive as well. And I'm not paid to say that, they're just the ones I like. So inside here you get the 15mm angle itself, which has a decorator's cap on. They all come with a decorator's cap on. That just closes off the valve. And you have the thermostatic head in the box as well. You also have a tail for the radiator. Now we're not going to use that today because this is a simple TRV swap. But if we were installing this on a new radiator, we would need that tail. But you can chuck that bit back in the box for this job because we're not going to need it. Now I'll stick a link to this TRV in the description so you can go and grab yourself one. Let's make a start. Should be a simple, easy little job, one that people find scary, but let's get it done. So the first thing you need to do is turn off the power to your boiler. You don't want your heating system calling for heat whilst we're doing this job. So find the switch for your boiler and turn it off. So if you're doing this job with a combi boiler, the next step for you will be to release the pressure on the system with a radiator key, or you can use a screwdriver. Now all you'll need to do for that is undo this bleed screw. You can see you've got a little trickle of water there. Basically all you need to do is drain that off until you have hardly any water, or a very, very light stream of water coming out of your radiator. But I'm going to stop that there because this is a gravity fed system with tanks in the loft, and I don't need to do that step at the moment. So now I'll show you where these tank bungs come in handy on a gravity fed system. This is your central heating tank. Chuck all the crap out of the way. Take the lid off of it so you can see what you're doing. Rusty inside. So within your header tank there's two pipes that you need to bung. The first one is the expansion vent pipe. So grab hold of that pipe and make sure you twist that bung until it's firmly inside the pipe. You want to make sure you get the perfect seal. If you don't get the perfect seal on these, you won't pull a vacuum and you're going to get wet. So take your time making sure that you get that bung in the pipe perfectly. And the second pipe that we need to bung, there's plenty of rusty water in here, so it's not the easiest one to show you, but there's a cold water feed at the bottom of the tank there. So with our second bung, we're going to go into that cold water feed, and again make a twist and motion whilst you push this in to get a nice firm bung. So that's the bungs in. Let's wash all this mangy water off my hands and we'll move on to the next step. So if you're following along with a gravity fed system, now you have your boiler off and you have your bungs in your header tank, so we are pulling a vacuum. Now what you need to do is open up the TRV, so the one that you're working on, make sure that valve is open. But the other valve on the radiator, in this case this lock shield valve, should be turned off. So we need to close that one, and it'll close off by turning it in a clockwise direction. There we go, that's that valve closed. Next up, protect the carpet, because we're going to head over to the bleed valve and we're going to test to see whether we're pulling a vacuum. So we're going to open this up and we should see a steady flow of water. And it could take some time, but we want to see that flow reduce and possibly even stop, and then we'll know, and that way we'll know that the vacuum's pulling down on them two bungs that we've put in the tank, and that we'll be good to go ahead and replace the TRV. We have a definite reduction in pressure there, so that means our tank bungs are working. If they weren't, that would still be a constant pressurized flow of water. So we can now do the bleed valve back up. So where are we at? If you're on a gravity fed system, you've got your boiler turned off, you've got the bungs in the tank, and you've tested the bleed valve to check that you have a good vacuum. If you're on a pressurized or combi boiler system, you've got the boiler turned off and you've released the pressure on the bleed screw at the top there. Now earlier we turned off the lock shield at the other end of this radiator. Now what you need to do is turn off that TRV as well. And before we go any further, we'll prepare our new TRV, because there is going to be some water coming out of here, and if you're working on a gravity fed system you don't want this to be open for too long, because if we lost the seal in the tank you're going to get wet. So we need to be fairly swift. So let's get the new valve made up and ready. So take your nut and olives off, because we already have them on the pipe. We're not going to be changing those. They can be chucked out of the way. For now, when we fit this, we can leave the decorator cap on, because that keeps the valve shut. Now there's a reason we want to keep the valve shut. Let me explain why. Now the reason we want to keep the valve shut is because when we undo these nuts, if we're in a muddle, we can quickly put the valve on. Now if we didn't have the valve shut, water would still come spewing out and we'd have to fit both of the nuts and the olives back onto the angled valve here. Whereas if we just have it shut, we've only got to tighten one of them nuts up to stop water coming out of the system. So I definitely recommend leaving the decorator cap fully on for now. Lay your valve somewhere close by so that you're ready to work and ready to get that valve back in place. So the next step's the same, whether you're on a pressurized system or a gravity fed system. We're going to crack off the bottom nut, not fully, but just loosen it off very slightly. And you'll see you're getting a slight drip on this, so make sure you've got your towels and your buckets and things at the ready, because you will get a little bit of water coming out of there. Next up, we're going to support the valve so that we don't damage the pipe, especially considering in this property we're on micro bore pipe, so it's not very strong. If we go cranking this top nut without supporting the valve, we're likely to damage or misshape the pipe, and that may make it harder to seal that back up. Worst case scenario, we may end up having to replace a kinked pipe, and we don't want that. So we're going to support this valve, and we'll do that with a pair of grips. And we'll just crack off that top nut. There you go, that's gone. Wind that nut back with your fingers, and you'll see at the moment we haven't got any rush of water coming out or anything like that, but make sure you've got all your buckets nearby, because once we move this valve away from the radiator we will get some water coming out. This is a really good one, not much water at all, just a drip really. Now this is where you want to hurry it up a little bit, because if our vacuum was to break, if you're on a gravity fed system, we would then have a considerable amount more water coming out of this radiator. So we need to hurry this up a little bit. So all we need to do now, and this can be a little bit tricky dependent on the pipes, this micro bore is not too tight, so we can move the valve away. It's even easier if it's on plastic pipe, but sometimes if you've got a copper pipe tail coming out of the floor where it's been screeded over or something like that, it can be harder to maneuver the pipes. So be careful, don't bend the pipes in the process. Crank off that bottom nut fully, and then we can simply remove the valve. Hopefully with not much water coming out either. Just let the worst of that water come out. And we can pull that valve out of the way, catch some of this water, grab your new valve and just put that new valve in place. And you can see just laying that valve in place like that has stopped that flow of water. And then we can start to do up our nuts. It can be a little bit tricky to get them all back in place. Might take a little bit of wiggling. So because we've got this valve shut, nothing can come out of here. We're safe with that. So we haven't got to worry about that one for now. We just do this one up here. And because they're on an olive, you could use jointing compound, but typically I don't. Now you don't need to go in with PTFE tape or anything like that. You can just do the nut up. The olive will reseal 99.9% of the time and shouldn't leak. So we don't need to worry about PTFE tape or anything like that. Just do this bottom nut back up for now. Again, I like to use my grips just to hold the valve steady whilst I nip that nut up, and that way I won't damage the pipe. So our bottom nut is done up. Now what we need to do is just push the valve closer to the top nut, and you can see we can just do that top nut up. Again, support the valve like we did before so it doesn't twist, and just nip up the top nut. Okay, so that's the two nuts done up nice and tight, and the angled valve is now installed. Next step, grab your thermostatic head and we'll install that in place of the decorator cap. So go ahead and remove the decorator cap, which in turn opens up the valve. Keep these knocking around somewhere, clues in the name when you might need them. Installing the thermostatic head is very, very simple. Make sure that it's fully open, because that makes it easier to install. Give it a gentle push and you'll actually feel that you're pushing that pin in, and then just turn the collar, and you just got to do that up hand tight. And that is our TRV installed. Don't forget to open up the lock shield valve on the other end of your radiator. Make sure that for now you've still got this bleed nipple closed off. All we now need to do is reinstate the heating system. If you're on a pressurized system with a combi boiler, open up all of your radiators and replace that lost pressure from the boiler filling loop. If you're doing this on a gravity fed system with the bungs in the tank, what we'll now need to do is go up into the loft and remove those bungs. Now we can go ahead and remove the bungs. And you'll probably hear and see a little bit of gurgling, but don't panic, that's normal. Put the lid back on the tank and any insulation. Turn the boiler back on, and now it's radiator bleed time. And now you've got the heating system reinstated, just check for leaks, but as you can see there's none there. Hopefully yours is the same and the job is done. So hopefully you've got no leaks, you've got your heating system back up and running, and I'm willing to bet you're surprised how easy that was to do. If that helped you out, hit the like button for me, because that does help this video to reach more people who wouldn't have seen it otherwise. And if you like DIY content just like this, make sure you're subscribed, because I've got tons of it to come throughout 2022 and beyond. There's a link to the TRV and the bungs in the description, so go grab those, they're great bits of kit. Also check us out on Instagram, because I've got an Instagram page now, the DIY guy. I'll stick a few pictures and bits and bobs on there, so you might want to give us a follow. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.